I'm out of date on what the technical challenges are. I know we made a bunch of improvements to the handling of group chat. Group chat and the general problem. Without being too much of a geek on this, the big problem that we didn't solve in the early architecture of Second Life was groups. We didn't design for it at all. I didn't imagine that it was even really a feature. I thought completely about local simulation and local chat. I didn't even think about really one-on-one chat at a distance when we first started designing Second Life. And so early on, of course, we put in the basic, join a group, because we needed it for things like land management. And then all of a sudden we had 80,000 groups, and then at some point we had essentially 800,000 people in 80,000 groups, and we're trying to process 250 messages a second between people in those groups. And it actually turns out that the problem of sending an arbitrary number of messages, or sending a large with a high volume, having to pick a whole bunch of people to send a message to in real time out of a list, turns out to actually be one of humanity's big computing problems. It's basically a huge scaling problem, and only a few companies have had to solve it. Companies that, you think of companies like Twitter, for example, as having to deal with this a little bit, where a lot of messages are happening per second, and those messages have to go out to a subset of the people in the whole Twitter universe. So that design problem is very considerable, and it limited. We were always afraid to raise the group limits because we knew it would just crater those systems. But today, I don't know. I don't know. I think we've raised the group count limits somewhat, and I don't really know why or when we'll raise them again.
Exactly. I believe that Mo has a question now. Is there any reason, Mo asks, that Linden Labs allows certain splitters for club owners, and what makes it considered gambling? The gambling question.
I'm so out of date on that. I can't even begin to take a question on that. I just don't know. That was something that was very much something I dealt with every day when I was CEO. But the rules around that are changing so fast, and I just have to say I have no idea. Wish I could answer that.
You're doing some pretty exciting stuff. I'm going to ask a question because you're doing some really, really cool stuff right now that seems to be cutting edge socially and culturally. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what you might have taken from Burning Man into it? It sounds a little burnery from what I've been reading about your new startup operation.
Yeah, my new startup is called Coffee and Power. And actually, my two co-founders, Fred and Ryan, Ryan actually came from Second Life with me, and the three of us have really jumped into the question of how work and working on projects together is going to change as technology continues to kind of connect us and make transactions simpler and make collaboration simpler. And we believe that we've only scratched the surface in the real world, so to speak, of how, for example, you can build a software startup quickly, or how you can design a website in a way that is kind of fastest and easiest and most fun with respect to how people interact. And so we did a couple things. The first thing we did was we built this thing called Worklist.net, which is kind of an open source. It's a kind of a mix between a freelancing system like Elance and a chat system and an open source sandbox, basically, for code that allows you to very, very rapidly build software using a kind of a long tail, if you will, of contributors where everybody's actually getting paid. So it's not like open source. It's not like an open source project. Everybody is getting paid, but people can, do very small chunks of work to help out. And this was actually the way we built our new company right from day one. When Ryan and I initially kind of walked out of the building, at Linden Lab, we went and sat down in a cafe and we said we're never going to have an office, and we're going to build some sort of crazy piece of software that allows us to communicate like we did in Second Life, very much in real time with people, get a bunch of people connected and involved in our project that aren't physically with us, and get people involved that are contributing a small fraction of their time or that kind of don't have the traditional background or experience or whatever that you'd expect to have in a software company. So we built this thing called Worklist, and now we're working on an iPhone app that is going to come out very soon, called Coffee and Power. And that app is going to let you basically sort of find people and talk to them and see what they're working on and see what their skills are around you in the real world, and at different locations in a city, for example. So, yeah, it's a really cool thing. Thank you, Dusty. It is cool.
That sounds really,
and it is called
cool.
Coffee and Power. And you can actually play with our app if you want to goof around with it a little bit. We do have an app up on the App Store, but we're not marketing it yet because it's still in alpha. It's still kind of we've got some major pieces that we still need to put in, but it kind of gives you an idea of where we're headed with this.
Very cool. So we've been asking all the questions, and actually have a couple more people, but I wonder if you want to ask us any questions, or if you have any thoughts for us just in general here as your burning community, because you're a burner too, but any thoughts for us?
Well, none really. I mean, I guess one question would always be, if you look at the subset of Second Life that is Burn 2, and you as builders, very specifically as builders of art, but both, for many people here, I'm sure both in Second Life and at Burning Man, what do you need? I guess, one question, the age-old question, what do you need from Second Life that would help you make your own creations better here? There's so many, I don't want to ask the general question, what next for Second Life, but more like what about Second Life would make Burn 2 better? I see somebody, Gianna, say materials. Please, maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. What do you mean? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by materials. Sim crossing for art cars. Yeah, that's a good one. So, I assume by that you mean that the art cars are too big and complicated to cross the Sims as small linked objects. Get them a bit out of date on some of this stuff.
Yeah, you still go flying sometimes.
Yeah, shaders and bump maps for mesh. Okay. Yep. I think that again, Second Life was born in the age before vertex and pixel shaders, so we didn't fundamentally build the system around it. And yeah, it sounds like people are saying obviously teleport, scale, latency, which is unfortunately the song of Second Life sometimes.
I think Mo had Darkfold had a question too, real quick for you. Tao, please. Tao, fire your question off. Tao was our leader of Lamplighters and has been really a very active supporter in the burning community, Phil. And says, you talked to some of this, but two potentially semi-related questions that you can answer together. Have you seen Cloud Party, and what kind of improvements do you see coming to SL in the near future? I know you're not as involved in SL these days, but I imagine you have some insights.
Yeah, improvements coming to Second Life in the near future. I'm not really going to take that on because I don't know as much as I'd want to give a clear set of things. There's Rod has led lots of interesting development and changes. I'm enjoying this client that I'm using right now that I just downloaded. The Cloud Party on the Cloud Party thing. Yeah, I got in there yesterday, I think, or yesterday and the day before. I got right in there right when it came out, and it was kind of cool. I remember feeling like it was 2003 all over again. I don't know if anybody else here was there, but I was kind of nostalgic. It was kind of charming. I felt like I was back. I felt like I was back at one of the newbie entry point sims or public build areas right in the beginning.
Kind of reminded me 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Cloud Party, obviously, what that shows us is that WebGL, is a pretty good rendering system. I didn't actually get a feel, maybe people here know, if you load those suckers up with, if you load Cloud Party up with the kind of object count that we have sitting around us right now, and avatars, does it work? I don't really know what the render limits are for something like WebGL. But I was delighted, obviously, at the fact that it uses a WebGL client. I was also delighted that it had sound. My understanding was WebGL didn't run sound very well, so I'm wondering how the sound is synced. But that's probably a really nerdy question in terms of
Hey,
would know.
I wanted to be sensitive to time since we're heading into a full hour. It's like snap our fingers and boom, it's gone. But how are you doing?
Why don't we take another 5 minutes or so? It's true. I actually have to run pretty soon because in the physical world, I'm here at Coffee and Power's palatial world headquarters on Market Street in San Francisco.
Nice. At
some point, I've got to run because I've got to go to a dinner tonight that's across town.
Okay, let's take one more from. I think Time Refresh has a question. Time, or can you type your question in?
I'm laughing at Will's "Go Save the World" comment there. I'm trying to be the real life kind of Tony Stark in all my adventures lately.
There you go.
Or something like that.
I think you enjoyed solving the problems you ran into early on. Which hurdles in the early software did you find interesting, fun to solve?
Sure, I was just talking about that just earlier. One of our developers here at Coffee and Power and I were talking about what was so hard and cool about Second Life, and it really was actually that problem of deciding what to send you. Most people, obviously, and I understand that I'm among them sometimes, are frustrated by the performance in Second Life. But what you have to understand is that the internet is still a kind of a 1 megabit per second or less experience for most people, and we are standing in the middle of, as I said, an enormous amount of data. We are a data. In some sense, this is metaphysically true of all of us, but we are literally in Second Life just a whole bunch of data, and each one of the people standing here, I remember we ran the numbers to this, each one of you is like 10 megabytes of data. And what that means is that as you move around, as you move your camera around, we have to basically sort of pick and choose in a very fast, efficient way from a big pile of data just the things that you most need to see and send them to you in the order you most need to see them. Now, does that always work? No, of course not. Look at all the rendering artifacts and things we're all seeing around us right now. I was waiting for my hair to load for like 5 minutes there. It's embarrassing. But, it's still amazing, and it was so fun to work on what we used to call the interest list. I was one of the guys at the whiteboard when we were designing the interest list, which was how are we going to send this data down? How are we going to remember what to send to each person and calculate it? That was like super fun for me as a designer and an engineer and an inventor.
Very cool. Yeah, early technology startups, and I'm a technology professional too, and a dot-com survivor, and it's so much fun at the startup, isn't it? I mean, it's just the things you can do and the things you can fix.
If you're lucky enough to take on a good hard problem, it's delightful.
Exactly. And it's different sized companies and hit different points in their maturity. I have been in some pretty big ones in my life too, and they've got different problems to solve in different ways. Tara has got a question, and then maybe we'll call it good. Tara, why don't you go? Says, Philip, I saw an interview with you back in 2008 that got me into SL, and in that interview, you hopped into the Sims Online and said you were hoping, or excuse me, you hoped into the Sims Online, I think she meant hopped, and said you're hoping that someday people would take their apps from website to website, and they'd be like Sims. Are you doing anything to work towards it now? He might have touched on that earlier, but he may want to expand on it.
Yeah.
Philip Terra's our art guru here. She wrangles all of our artists and brings out amazing art into the sim here for us.
Yeah, as I said, I guess there's a bit of a